My name is Walter Merriman, but everyone back home calls me Walt. I was born on March 14, 1961, in a patch of Texas where the land rolls flat and the sunsets pour gold into the horizon. I grew up in a modest farmhouse outside Lubbock, the middle child of a father who worked the cotton fields and a mother who held our family together with her quiet strength. Sunday mornings were for church, not because we were holy, but because it was the heartbeat of the town. Folks there believed you could measure a man by whether he tipped his hat to a neighbor and showed up when someone was in need. I was raised Southern Baptist, and for most of my life I carried the title Christian like an old hat, worn, familiar, but not something I really thought about. I believed in God the way I believed in the wind. I couldn't see him, but I figured he was out there. My faith was comfortable, never costly. And though I had a soft spot for old folks, I never felt it was my job to look after anyone outside my own circle. By the time I was 64, I'd lived most of my life as a diesel mechanic, owned a small repair shop, been married and divorced, and raised one daughter who'd moved far away. My house was simple, my only daily companion a tired old hound dog named Buddy. Life had settled into quiet routines until the evening of August 22, 2025. A friend had called about a broken generator in an abandoned grain silo just outside of town. I drove out there at sunset, the August heat still heavy in the air. Inside the silo, the smell was stale, the metal walls echoing every step. I climbed a rusted catwalk to get a better look at the machinery. That's when I heard it, a low groan of metal under my boots. The floor gave way, and I plunged into darkness, landing in what felt like a pit of moving needles. Hundreds of wasps exploded around me, stinging in a frenzy. My skin burned, my throat swelled, and each breath became a desperate gasp. My knees buckled. I remember seeing a shaft of sunlight cutting through the dust above me, and then, as my vision closed in, even that light was gone. The first thing I noticed was the absence of sound, not quiet, but a heavy, pressing void that made my ears ache. It was as if the world had been drained of air and left only the weight of silence. I tried to open my eyes, but I wasn't sure they were closed. Shapes began to form, not from light, but from something darker than shadow, like figures drawn from the absence of hope itself. My feet were on solid ground, yet it felt wrong, slick like oil, soft like flesh, and shifting under my weight. The air was thick, humid, and carried a smell I can't fully describe, part rotting wood, part open grave. I began to hear faint sounds, distant at first, muffled sobs, low moans, and something that might have been chains dragging. Then, out of the dark, came light, but not the kind that warms. It was a dull, red glow seeping through cracks in what looked like walls made of interwoven bodies. They were pressed together, eyes open but unblinking, mouths moving without sound. When I stepped closer, the sobs grew louder, and I realized they were not walls at all, but living souls, trapped together in endless contact, their skin melting into one another. I wanted to back away, but something in the distance pulled me forward, a deep, rhythmic thud, like a heartbeat too slow to belong to anything alive. As I moved, the ground shifted into a kind of causeway over a pit, and from below came a chorus of screams. Flames didn't leap here. Instead, they oozed upward like molten tar, wrapping themselves around those who tried to climb out, dragging them back into the depths. Then I saw faces. Faces I knew. My high school shop teacher, the neighbor who used to mow his lawn in the evenings, even a cousin I hadn't spoken to in decades. Their eyes locked on me with a strange mixture of recognition and accusation, as if my presence here was no accident. And then, like a knife in my chest, I saw my father. He was standing knee-deep in the tar, his arms bound by something invisible, his eyes clouded with sorrow. I tried to reach him, but every step forward felt like walking through wet cement. He didn't call my name, he didn't need to. I could feel his thoughts pressing into me. You saw the lonely, and you passed them by. My knees buckled. I remembered every nursing home visit I had avoided, every time I told myself I was too busy to call. Behind me, a sudden heat rose, and I turned to see movement in the shadows, tall figures, cloaked in something like molten iron, their faces hidden, dragging chains with hooks at the end. They moved toward me slowly, savoring my panic. The moment the first hook grazed my arm, the sobbing from the walls around me became deafening, a tide of grief that swallowed my will to stand. Somewhere beyond them, far in the dark, I thought I heard a whisper, not from them, but from something deeper still. It wasn't my name this time. It was a command, "You will see." The command, "You will see," pulled me like a hook sunk behind my ribs. The cloaked things didn't rush me. They parted, letting me stumble down a corridor that wasn't a corridor at all, more like a canyon carved through the living wall of mourners. Wherever I looked, their eyes followed. Not hatred, witness. The kind that makes you feel smaller than truth. The slow heartbeat I'd heard swelled into a hammering cadence. I rounded a bend and entered a chamber so vast I couldn't see the ceiling. Rows upon rows of metal gurneys stretched like crop lines, each with a thin, grey blanket and a shape beneath. Above every bed hung a telephone, the old rotary kind, each one ringing out of sync with the others. The sound was maddening, thousands of unanswered calls braided into a single howl. I knew this place without knowing its name. When I drew closer to the first gurney, the blanket rose and fell in shallow rhythm. An old woman turned her head toward me. Her lips were cracked, but her words were clear inside my mind. "Did you ever mean to call, Walter?" I had never met her. I had walked past 100 like her in my life, telling myself it wasn't my assignment. The phone above her bed rang and rang. My hands wouldn't lift. I whispered, "I'm sorry," and the cord coiled a little tighter around the hook, as if sorry weighed less than air. The next gurney. A man with war medals pinned to his blanket, eyes milky with cataracts. "I taught your Sunday school teacher's teacher," he said without breath. "We prayed for the boys who would come after us. Did you pray for the men who came before you?" The phone trilled on, unanswered. When I tried to grab the receiver, it burned my palm. Not fire, conscience. Farther down the row I saw a figure sitting upright, hands folded. My father. Not bound in tar now. His eyes were younger here, the way they looked the day I left home. "Son," he said with the gentleness that always undid me, "you learned the engines, I taught you the tools. But the tool you forgot was time, and it only goes one way." The phone above him was silent. It had already rung its last. I dropped to my knees. I was busy. I thought there'd be time later. I thought someone else. The chorus of phones drowned me out. Across the chamber, faces lifted, mouths opened, and the cry rose like steam, the sound of abandoned parents calling children who had learned to silence their own hearts. The gurneys began sliding, as if on tracks, descending into the floor one by one, each bed taking its ringing phone with it, vanishing into a red-lit shaft. I lunged for the edge and looked down. There were more levels. Thousands more. The cloaked attendants returned, their hooks glinting like wet teeth. One pointed past me, and a new corridor opened. I walked into a narrower hall where there were no beds, only windows, like the viewing panes of a nursery. But behind the glass were not infants. Behind the first pane, I saw the break room of a nursing facility. 2 aides scrolled their phones while an old man in the corner choked softly. I banged on the glass. My fists made no sound. The second pane showed a daughter signing an admission form, eyes dry, voice flat, just for a few weeks. The calendar in the corner flipped on its own, weeks into months, months into years. The third pane showed me, alive, in my shop, telling a church friend I couldn't volunteer because Saturday was catch-up day. I wanted to run, but the corridor narrowed until the glass across from me reflected my own face. I pressed my forehead to it. "I didn't know," I said, hardly daring to hear the lie in it. A voice behind me, velvet and venom, answered, "You knew enough to be comfortable." My mouth went dry. I turned. Standing in a doorway of emberglow was a man I recognized from a news clipping aging in the memory. He'd lived 2 blocks over when we were kids, the first boy I ever saw steal from a widow's mailbox. He smiled now with half his teeth. "We all came here by practicing small cruelties until they felt like gravity," he said. The attendant stepped aside for him as if he were a descent. "Come see what grows where excuses are planted." He led me into a circular pit where the walls were shelves stacked with boxes labeled with single words, "Later." Somebody. Busy. Not my gift. They were packed to overflowing. From inside each box, scratching. He pried one open with a hook. Out spilled a handful of shriveled things like dried figs, except they pulsed faintly. When they hit the ground, they sprouted twisted roots that writhed around my boots. I kicked free, gagging. "Confess," the man said, almost cheerfully. "Say it. Say the truth and the room will change." I swallowed. I loved myself more than I loved them. The shelves shuddered. Several boxes split. The roots recoiled from my feet, leaving a ring of clear floor around me. It wasn't mercy, it was exposure. In the sudden quiet I heard a thread of sound different from the phone's, a low, steady weeping. I followed it to a doorway marked with a sign I couldn't read until I stepped through. The letters arranged themselves into meaning, "Ward of Unvisited." The room beyond was a chapel built from hospital curtains and wheelchairs. Candles burned without flame. In the front pew sat a woman with my mother's hands, folded just the way Mom had taught me to fold mine as a boy. She lifted her head. It wasn't my mother, but the resemblance tore something open in me. "Sit," she said, "and I Saturday tell me why you left them alone." I didn't know how to sit with sorrow, I said. I could fix engines. I couldn't fix goodbyes. She nodded, not unkind. "Then why did you pretend you would, later?" I covered my face. The walls answered for me. Stories poured themselves into the air, sons who never called, daughters who sent flowers and no visits, pastors who preached honor but didn't knock on the ward door, grandkids who waved through screens and never crossed a threshold. Each story ended with the same closing click of a phone that had rung too long. The attendants entered. For the first time they moved quickly. Hooks caught my sleeves, my shoulders, my heart. They lifted me to the altar, which wasn't an altar at all but a bed with straps. Above it hung a single phone, black and heavy. "Answer," the room whispered. "Answer now and you will answer forever." They pressed the receiver to my ear. No voice came, only breathing, thin, brittle, terrified. "Hello," I said, my own voice small. The breathing quickened. "Walter," came a man's threadbare whisper. I didn't know him. "Will you come?" he asked. The hooks tightened. The attendants leaned close. I could feel their heat. I don't know you," I stammered. "That never mattered," the whisper said, and then the line went dead. The phone melted in my hand like tar. It dripped down my wrist, burning trails, sealing my fingers together. The straps cinched. The chamber tilted, or maybe I did, and the bed began to slide toward a chute opening in the floor, the edge glowing. Panic isn't the right word. Panic is a wild animal in the brush. This was a verdict standing to be read. I thrashed. I begged. I promised what I could never deliver from where I lay. The attendants did not gloat. They didn't need to. Their work was inevitability. As the bed's feet reached the lip, everything slowed to the speed of a decision. A tide of cries rose from below, mothers and fathers and old soldiers and soft-spoken teachers, all calling not for rescue but for presence. "Be with us," their voices said, braided into one. It was never duty. It was love. Something in me broke open like a locked box finally pried with a crowbar. Out spilled a memory I had kept packed away, 7 years earlier, a man alone in a corner room, TV muted, hands folded, waiting for a knock that never came. I had walked past that door. I had told myself I had a carburetor on the bench. I had told myself it wasn't my gift. I did this, I said, not to the room, not to the attendants, but to the God I had kept at polite distance for decades. I did this to them. I did this to me. For the first time since I arrived, the darkness moved like something alive, but not toward me. It recoiled, inch by inch, from the words. Confession, in this place, was not a speech. It was a key that turned from the inside. The bed halted. The attendants tilted their heads, as if listening to a voice I couldn't hear. Then, in unison, they stepped back. The straps loosened, not by their hands, but as if the leather remembered what it was like to be soft. Beside the altar bed, a door I hadn't seen opened just enough to spill a seam of light across the floor. It wasn't bright. It wasn't even warm. But it was true, and truth in this place was the only air a soul could breathe. All hopes are gone, the descent boy had said before. But now I understood he'd meant all false hopes. The kind I'd planted in boxes labeled later. Walk, said a voice that did not belong to this realm, though it filled it. Walk and look upon what you have loved, and what I love. I slid off the bed, legs trembling, tar cooling on my skin like shame turned to scar. I turned toward the seam of light, not because I had earned it, but because someone had opened it. And as I stepped through, the ringing of phones receded like a tide going out, leaving, at last, the shape of a shoreline. The light was not a flood, it was a thread, and I followed it like a man tracing a lifeline through smoke. The seam widened with each step until it became a doorway into a room that looked nothing like the pit I had left. No flames. No hooks. Just a long hallway lined with ordinary doors, the kind you see in small-town clinics and church basements. Each door had a nameplate with no name, only a verb: visit. Listen. Stay. Remember. Return. I paused at the first door. It opened on its own. Inside was a kitchen washed in afternoon light. A pot simmered. 2 plates on the table. An empty chair. A woman with snow-white hair stood at the sink, drying a cup that didn't need drying. She never turned, but she said softly, "He promised he'd come on Sunday." The room blurred, like breath across glass, and was gone. The next door, a chapel with fold-out chairs and a piano missing 2 keys. A man in a wheelchair hummed blessed assurance to an audience of no one. He smiled toward the aisle as if he could see someone entering. The smile held, then faded by degrees, like the tail of a comet. The door closed. "Why do you show me this?" I asked the light, though I had no right to questions. The answer came not as thunder but like the familiar cadence of my own name spoken by someone who had known me since sound began. "Because you asked to see," he said. I knew the voice. I had read it in red letters and then treated those letters like embroidery on a blanket I never meant to use. When he spoke here, the hallway itself leaned to listen. "Walk with me, Walter." I never saw his face all at once. It was like standing too close to the sun and knowing the sun is a person. I knew him the way a son knows the weight of his father's hand on his shoulder in the dark. We moved past the doors, and with each step the verbs on the plates deepened, carved into me as much as into wood. He stopped at a door marked "Stay." It opened to a nursing home day room, the kind with a TV playing a game show no one watched. 3 residents slept in recliners. In the corner sat a woman with a Bible open to Psalms, her finger resting on a line she had memorized long ago. Her lips moved soundlessly. "How long, O Lord?" The clock on the wall had hands but no numbers. Time here was measured in faithfulness and absence. Jesus spoke without accusation. "You measured love by usefulness. I measure usefulness by love." I tried to answer, but words dissolved. He led me to a window that looked upon a road I recognized, the one leading to my shop. I saw a younger me, locking the door, rolling my shoulders, telling myself I'd rest and make that visit after I get my strength back. He touched the glass, and the scene widened to show the room I didn't enter that day, a man whose name I never learned, waiting with a deck of cards shuffled and squared, hoping for company rather than a game. You were not punished for ignorance, Jesus said. You were starving from it. We came to a door without a verb. It had only a small cross, carved so shallow you could miss it if you were moving fast. He opened it, and we stepped into what looked like a hospital room built of light. No walls, just boundaries I somehow understood. In the center stood a bed without straps, white as the inside of a seashell. On its sheet sat every apology I had ever rehearsed and never spoken, every small I'm sorry I had mailed to the future and never sent. They lay there like unopened letters. Pick one, he said. My hand hovered and then closed around a simple envelope with an old address, the nursing home I visited with my mother as a boy. When I opened it, no paper fell out, only a memory, fully formed, me, 10 years old, pushing a wheelchair too fast, laughing because the old man in it laughed with me. My mother's voice, slow down, Walt. Honor is the speed of love. The memory filled the room with a scent like cedar after rain. I forgot, I said. You chose other teachers, he answered, and there was sorrow in it, not scorn. But you have not outlived my mercy. He turned, and the light drew close enough to feel like weather on my skin. Listen, he said, and his words were not sound, more like a shaping. The place you saw, the gurneys and the phones, is the echo of a neglect that men baptize with excuses. Hell is not only flame, Walter. It is the arithmetic of a world where people become numbers. I did not number you. I named you. I sank. What do you want from me? He didn't say more church, better slogans, or grand gestures. He said, presence. Return to the forgotten rooms. Speak names. Hold hands. Wash feet not because they are dirty, but because they are mine. He paused, and the pause was holy. Your town has a ward with a window that faces west. Every evening, one woman watches that sun and counts the cars. Go sit down and break her counting. He showed me then something I had not expected, not my failures, but the faces of those I had once touched without realizing it mattered, the old mechanic I'd given a ride home in the rain, the widow whose porch I repaired on a Saturday when the parts shipment was late, the veteran who cried in my office because a truck's engine finally turned over and he said it sounded like hope. Each face brightened until the room felt crowded with daybreak. These are seeds, Jesus said. They remembered what you forgot. Now remember with them. I dared a question I had been afraid to ask since the phones began ringing. Where is my father, truly? He looked at me the way doctors look when they have good news they can't explain yet. He is where promises are kept. And then, because he knew the ache, he added, you will see in my timing, not yours. We stood again in the hallway. The verbs on the doors were no longer instructions I might obey. They were descriptions of the life he was offering. Visit. Listen. Stay. Remember. Return. The last door was marked go. He placed his hand, heavy and gentle, over my heart. Heat moved through me, not burning, but mending. Walter, he said, and it felt like being called for the first time by the name I was born for, I am not sending you back to pay a debt. I am sending you back to live loved. Do you understand? I think so, I whispered. Be with them because you are with me. His smile, though I still could not see his full face, was the kind of yes that built worlds. When you sit by their beds, you sit by mine. When you answer, the phones stop ringing here. The light gathered itself as if he were stepping away, not from me, but toward the door I was to walk through. Fear rose, a child's fear of the first day of school, but it was wrapped in courage I knew wasn't mine. One more thing, he said, and his voice was near my ear. When you tell this story, do not sell fear. Speak love so plainly that the fearful understand what it looks like. And say my name not as a threat, but as a promise. The hallway folded like a map. The verbs pressed into my chest until they beat with my heart. The seam of light narrowed to a single thread again, and I felt myself falling, not down, but into the weight of a body, the braided ache of stings and swelling and breath like a locked door. Somewhere far away, someone shouted my name. A siren Dopplered. My heart tugged once, twice. Return, he whispered, and I did. I woke to the antiseptic bite of a hospital room, the beeping of machines anchoring me to flesh again. My body ached, my throat burned, but the greater weight was in my chest. I had seen what neglect builds in eternity, and the memory clung like smoke. Part of me longed for the light and his voice, part of me dreaded the world that had made forgetting so easy. I knew I'd been sent back, yet wondered if I was worthy to carry what I'd been shown in the weeks after. I could not shake the verbs carved into me: visit, listen, stay, remember, return. I sold the shop and walked into the nursing home my mother once took me to as a boy. I learned their names, their stories, their favorite hymns. Each hand I held felt like a prayer answered. My mission was no longer repair of machines, but the mending of souls left waiting. Every room became a sacred appointment. I no longer count my life by years or paychecks, but by the sunsets I've shared and the eyes I've met without hurry. The fear of returning to that pit is gone, replaced by the promise of his presence in every forgotten corner. I walk lighter now, knowing the phones in that other place grow silent each time I sit, listen, and love. My days are no longer my own, they are his, and that is my peace.